In a world where the hustle and bustle of life often drowns out the whispers of destiny, there exists a quiet truth that we often overlook. Greatness doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes, it is a soft whisper, a gentle touch, a quiet moment that changes the course of everything. This is the story of Finn, a boy from a small village, whose journey into the extraordinary was marked not by ambition or force, but by a single, silent feather that chose him. Finn was not the type of person to chase after glory or recognition. He lived in the shadows, working humbly in the background, content with the simplicity of his life. But destiny has a way of finding those who least expect it. When the feather landed softly on Finn's shoulder, it was not just a coincidence, it was a turning point. That moment would mark the beginning of a transformation, not just in Finn's life, but in the lives of the many souls he would one day guide. Through this story, we are reminded that true greatness often comes quietly, without fanfare. The world may overlook the shy, the humble, the ones who don't seek the spotlight, but it is these very people who often carry the most powerful light. Just as the feather did not chase Finn, destiny does not always chase us. It arrives when we are ready to accept it, to embrace it. And so, Finn's journey begins, not because he was looking for it, but because it was always meant for him. It was a quiet morning in the village of Evershade, a place nestled between towering cliffs and misty valleys, where the only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. The village was small, its inhabitants few, and it thrived in the stillness of nature. Amidst the everyday rhythms of village life, no one could have predicted the arrival of something so small, so delicate, yet destined to change everything. A feather, soft and light, drifted gently through the morning air, unnoticed by most. It was unlike any other feather seen before. It shimmered in the early light, as though it had been kissed by the very stars themselves. But it did not fall like ordinary feathers do. This one had a purpose. It landed silently on the shoulder of a boy named Finn. Finn was the youngest son of the village's blacksmith. He was shy, often quiet, and always in the background, tending to tasks that required little attention. He was not the kind of person who sought attention, nor did he believe he was capable of doing anything extraordinary. The world moved around him, but he stayed where he was comfortable behind the shadows, hidden from the light. That morning, as the feather settled on his shoulder, Finn felt an unusual sensation. It was not like anything he had felt before. A warmth spread through him, gentle but undeniable, and for the first time in his life, he felt seen. A small voice whispered inside his mind, though it wasn't his own, "You are the one." Finn shook his head, wondering if the long hours of his work had finally begun to take their toll. But when he reached up to brush the feather off, it refused to leave. It remained, as though it had chosen him. At first, he was unsure what to make of this strange occurrence. It felt like a dream, but it was too real to ignore. As the day wore on, he found that the feather did not fall away. It remained on his shoulder, a quiet presence that reminded him of something larger than himself. Later that evening, after the village had settled into its usual tranquility, Finn sat alone in the meadow, the feather still resting on him. The sky above was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. A familiar unease lingered in his chest, a feeling he had always known but never understood. He felt as though the feather had come to deliver some kind of message. But what could it mean? What could this small, delicate thing have to say to a boy like him? Finn sighed, lost in thought, unaware that this was only the beginning of his journey. Days went by, and Finn's life remained as quiet as it always had been. The feather, now resting gently on his shoulder, became a secret he carried in silence. It was no longer a thing of surprise or wonder to him. It had become a part of him, like a shadow that never quite left. Sometimes, when he was alone in the fields or working in the quiet corners of his home, he could feel its presence, a soft weight, a pull. It wasn't heavy, but it was constant. The world around him moved in its usual way, with its familiar rhythms, the clatter of the blacksmith's hammer, the whispers of the village elders, the laughter of children playing by the river. Yet Finn knew something had shifted, something subtle, like the breeze that carries the scent of rain before the storm. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it. Deep inside, an unexplainable sensation that something far greater than his small, humble life was calling him. But what was it? What did it mean? He didn't have the answers, and so he carried on with his life, keeping the feather a secret, its meaning still unclear, its purpose a mystery that gnawed at his mind. The days passed uneventfully, and Finn clung to his quiet routine, unsure of what to do with the weight that settled in his chest. It wasn't a burden exactly, but it was a strange feeling of being on the verge of something he couldn't yet grasp. Then, on the night of the full moon, everything changed. The night was clear. The sky spread wide with a sea of stars, and the moon hung low in the sky, its light bathing the village in an ethereal glow. Finn had just finished his evening chores, the small tasks that made up his world: sweeping the porch, tending to the fire, and checking on the horses. The village had quieted for the night, its homes settled under the quiet watch of the moon. As he stepped out into the cool night air, something caught his eye: movement at the edge of the forest. At first, he thought it was nothing, just a trick of the light or the rustling of the trees in the wind. But then, he saw it again, clearer this time. A figure, tall and cloaked, standing still among the shadows of the trees. The figure seemed to shimmer in the pale moonlight, like a shadow itself, yet there was an undeniable presence about it. The cloak billowed around them, dark and almost otherworldly, yet as the figure moved, it seemed to blend with the night sky, as though they were made of starlight and shadow. Finn's heart raced, a mix of curiosity and fear bubbling up inside him. He had always been a boy who kept to himself, someone who preferred the quiet of the village and the solitude of the fields. People, and the attention that came with them, had always made him uneasy. But this figure felt different. There was no malice in the air, no sense of danger. It was as though the figure was a part of the night itself, calm, ancient, and eternal. The fear he had expected to feel didn't come. Instead, a strange sense of belonging settled over him, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The figure turned, their movements graceful and deliberate, as if the very act of turning had been part of a long, practiced ritual. They raised a hand, an invitation to come closer. "Come," the figure's voice called out, soft yet commanding, as though it carried the weight of the ages. It sounded like the wind rustling through the trees, the soft murmur of something ancient calling across the boundaries of time and space. "It is time." Finn froze. His heart seemed to skip a beat, and for a moment, he stood there, unsure whether he should respond. But some unspoken pull drew him forward. There was no fear in him now, only a quiet certainty that this was something he had to do. With tentative steps, Finn moved toward the figure. The night seemed to part before him, the wind stilling as if waiting, as though the world itself held its breath. The figure stood still, their face hidden beneath the folds of the hood, their form both distant and intimate, like something both here and beyond. As Finn drew nearer, the figure raised their hand once more, and a soft, golden light began to emanate from their fingers. The glow was subtle at first, barely more than a shimmer in the air, but it grew brighter as the figure's hand moved toward Finn. His eyes widened in surprise as the light bathed his face, warm and comforting, yet filled with an undeniable power. The feather on his shoulder, his feather shimmered in response, glowing with an intensity he had never seen before. It was as if the light from the figure and the feather were connected, drawn together by some invisible thread. The figure spoke again, their voice carrying the weight of the moment. "You are the one." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Finn's breath caught in his throat. The one? What did that mean? The figure's words continued, ringing out like a bell that struck deep inside his chest. Chosen by the feather, chosen to be the next guide of souls. Dated. The words felt heavy, like stones sinking deep into water, their ripples spreading outward through the very fabric of reality. Finn's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Guide of Souls? He had heard of such a title before, whispers from the village elders, stories told in hushed tones around the fire. The Guide of Souls was a legend, a myth, a tale passed down through generations about a person who could walk between the worlds of the living and the dead, guiding lost souls to their next journey, offering them peace before they passed on. It was a role spoken of only in whispers, for no one had ever truly seen a Guide of Souls. They were just stories. Yet here was this figure, standing before him, telling him that he had been chosen for such a role. The weight of the words settled over him, suffocating and awe-inspiring all at once. Finn's hands shook as he tried to process the enormity of what was happening. Guide of Souls? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But that's just a story, a legend. You're saying I'm meant to? The figure smiled beneath their hood, the curve of their lips a mystery. You are not just any boy. You were always meant for this role. Destiny has chosen you. Finn's mind swirled. This couldn't be real. How could it be? He was just Finn, the quiet boy, the blacksmith's son. He had never sought greatness. He had never longed for adventure. He didn't even know what it meant to be a Guide of Souls. He was no one special. But I'm just me, Finn said, shaking his head in disbelief. I'm no one special. I don't even know what this means. The figure's expression softened, though their face remained hidden. They seemed almost amused, as though they had expected this reaction. That is exactly why you are the one, they said, their voice gentle but firm. The humble are often the ones who hold the greatest power. You are not meant to seek greatness, Finn. Greatness has found you, and with it comes a responsibility far greater than you could have imagined. Finn swallowed hard, the weight of their words settling on him like a stone in his chest. The humble? He thought of all the years he had spent quietly in the background, content with being unnoticed, with working in the shadows. Could it really be true? Was he meant for something more than this simple life? The figure tilted their head slightly, as if sensing his uncertainty. Destiny does not always come in the form we expect. It does not always come with a crown or a throne. It comes with a task. And that task, Finn, is yours. Everyone. For a long moment, Finn stood there, lost in the immensity of it all. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of fear and something else, something deep, stirring within him. Something that felt like a spark of recognition. The figure reached out, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. The touch was warm, like sunlight on his skin, comforting and steady. You don't have to know how yet. You only need to trust that you are the one chosen for this path. The feather has chosen you, Finn. And in time, you will come to understand what it means to be the Guide of Souls. With those words, the figure stepped back, their form dissolving into the night as if they were part of the shadows themselves. Finn stood alone, the soft glow of the feather still shining brightly on his shoulder, as if in confirmation, he was the one chosen, and there was no going back now. A quiet stillness settled over the forest. The moon above shone bright and clear, as though watching over him. Finn didn't know what came next, but for the first time in his life, he knew one thing. He was no longer just a boy. He was something more, something greater. And though the road ahead was unknown, he knew that somehow he would walk it. The days following Finn's encounter with the cloaked figure were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and awe. His life, once so simple and predictable, had been completely turned upside down. The revelation of his new role as the Guide of Souls had struck him like a thunderclap, leaving him reeling. What did it mean to guide souls? To help the lost spirits find their way to peace? Was he truly ready for such a responsibility? These questions consumed him, swirling in his mind as he tried to make sense of it all. The cloaked figure, whose name remained a mystery, spent hours with him, explaining the intricacies of his new role. Finn learned that the Guide of Souls was not merely a position, it was a calling, a duty that spanned lifetimes. The figure spoke in riddles, but the meaning behind their words began to seep into Finn's consciousness. The role of the guide was not to lead the souls on their journey directly, but to offer them a choice, a path, a moment of clarity before they crossed over. The souls were not empty shades. They were beings with emotions, with histories, with regrets and hopes. It was Finn's responsibility to help them find peace, to give them the light they needed to move forward. It was a task beyond anything Finn had ever imagined for himself. He had never thought of himself as special, just a quiet boy from a small village. But now, the weight of destiny pressed heavily upon him, and the feather, still nestled on his shoulder, was a constant reminder of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. He could feel its warmth, a gentle presence that seemed to hum with energy, and every time he touched it, a sense of calm washed over him. Yet, beneath that calm, there was a storm brewing within him, a storm of uncertainty. How could he live up to such a task? How could he guide souls when he himself was so unsure of his own path? On the 7th day after his encounter with the cloaked figure, Finn was led to the ancient temple deep in the heart of the forest. It had taken them most of the day to reach the temple. Navigating through the dense thicket, the trees towering above them like ancient sentinels. The forest seemed alive, its whispers carried on the wind, and the air grew thick with an unspoken anticipation. Finn couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking deeper into a place that held more than just physical weight. It was as though he was stepping into the very fabric of time itself. The temple was unlike anything Finn had ever seen. It was old, so old that it felt as though it had grown from the earth itself. The stone walls were covered in thick, velvety moss, and the roof was supported by towering pillars that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky, disappearing into the foliage above. The stones of the temple were worn and weathered by centuries of use, but there was an undeniable reverence in the air, a stillness that filled the space with an almost sacred quality. The sunlight barely filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground and giving the temple an otherworldly glow. As they entered, Finn felt the weight of the temple settle over him, a quiet pressure that seemed to pull him deeper into its heart. There was no sound, only the echo of their footsteps on the ancient stone floor. The cloaked figure moved with purpose, leading Finn down a narrow passageway that opened into a vast chamber. At the center of the room was a stone altar, its surface worn smooth by the touch of countless hands. It was here, in this sacred place, that the souls would gather, waiting for the guidance they needed to move on. The cloaked figure gestured toward the altar. "This is where the souls gather," they explained, their voice low and steady, as though it had been honed by years, even centuries, of experience. When someone passes from this world, their spirit comes here to await guidance. You will be the one to help them find their path. You stated another to-dos. Finn stepped closer, his heart beating faster as he looked down at the altar. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, just a stone slab worn smooth by time. But as he looked closer, he could feel something pulsing beneath the surface, a faint energy that hummed in the air. It was as though the souls were already there, waiting for him, their presence invisible but palpable. Finn's hands trembled as he reached out to touch the altar. There was a strange sense of connection, as though he were not just in this moment, but in the very history of the place. He could feel the weight of the souls, each one longing for peace, for guidance, for a path forward. The cloaked figure raised their hand again, and with a subtle movement, a mist began to swirl around the altar. The air grew thick with energy, charged with a presence that Finn could barely comprehend. From within the mist, a figure slowly began to materialize. At first, it was just a vague shape, but as it solidified, Finn's breath caught in his throat. It was an elderly woman, her face lined with age and wisdom. Her features were delicate but worn, her skin like parchment. But her eyes were filled with a deep understanding, a quiet knowing that seemed to see straight through Finn. There was a gentleness to her, an aura of calm that radiated from her being. And then it struck him, the souls he would guide were not mere stories. They were real. They had faces, histories, emotions. They were people. The woman looked at him with a kind smile, her eyes soft with compassion. Finn stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He had never been in the presence of a soul before, never seen one. never spoken to one. He had only heard stories. But here she was, standing before him, waiting for him to do something. "You are ready," the cloaked figure said, stepping back and giving Finn the space he needed. Finn took a deep breath, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and something else, something unfamiliar but undeniable. His hand shook as he extended it toward the woman, unsure of what to expect. As his fingers brushed against hers, a surge of warmth and calm flooded through him. It was as though her very essence was being transferred to him, as though all her pain, her joy, and her experiences were being passed along in that one fleeting moment. Finn could feel her soul, delicate yet strong, and he knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth in his hand, the connection that he had just made. The weight of her presence felt like a blessing, a responsibility, and in that moment, he understood this was what he was meant to do. This was the purpose he had been called for. He was not just helping her move on, he was giving her peace, a guiding light for her soul to follow, a path to walk as she transitioned into the next world. The woman smiled at him one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude, and then, as if the air had gently lifted her, she began to fade into the mist. Her form softened, dissolving like a wisp of smoke until she was no longer there. Her spirit now at peace, her journey complete. Finn stood still for a long moment, his hand still outstretched, his heart racing in his chest. He had done it. He had guided his first soul, and in that moment, he realized the weight of the task ahead of him. There would be more souls, more people to guide, and each one would be different. Some would be easy, others would be difficult, but each would be a chance to help, to offer them the peace they sought. The cloaked figure stepped forward, their presence silent but reassuring. "You have done well," they said, their voice like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. "This is only the beginning. There will be many more souls to guide. But you are ready. Trust in yourself." Finn nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered within him. But as the mist cleared and the room returned to its stillness, he couldn't help but feel that something inside him had shifted. He had started this journey unsure of himself, but now, standing in the heart of the temple, he felt a quiet strength begin to grow within him. He wasn't just Finn, the boy from the village. He was now the guide of souls, and for the first time in his life, Finn knew his path. The days that followed Finn's first experience with the souls were filled with quiet routine. Every morning, the cloaked figure would arrive, guiding him through the temple's sacred halls and helping him focus on his new role as the guide of souls. Finn had already helped several spirits find their peace, and with each soul he guided, a small part of him grew more confident. He could feel the weight of the responsibility, but it wasn't overwhelming, at least. Not yet. Every soul was different. Some were young, their faces filled with the rawness of life cut too short. Others were old, their bodies faded with age, but their spirits vibrant, filled with regrets, memories, and unfinished stories. No matter the soul, Finn had to offer them peace, guiding them with steady hands and a heart that remained focused on their needs, not his own. He would listen to their stories, feel their pain, and help them find the peace they longed for before moving on to the next journey. But as the days turned into weeks, doubts began to creep into his heart. They were subtle at first, just fleeting thoughts that crossed his mind when he was alone. At first, he pushed them away. He was doing the right thing, wasn't he? He was helping them. But soon, the doubts grew stronger, like a persistent whisper in the back of his mind, gnawing away at his confidence. Finn was still just a boy who had grown up in the village of Evershade, hiding in the shadows of others, always unsure of his place in the world. He wasn't a warrior, a scholar, or a leader. He was just Finn, so how could he be the one chosen for this role? The weight of guiding souls, helping them cross from one world to the next, was something far beyond his understanding. He had no wisdom, no training, no real purpose. He was just a humble boy, raised by his father in the quiet corners of a sleepy village. Could it be true that destiny had chosen him? Or was it all a mistake? As he sat alone one evening in the temple, the weight of these thoughts grew heavier. The sun had just set, and the temple was bathed in a soft, dim light. The cloaked figure had left for the evening, leaving Finn in the solitude of the sacred halls. He sat on a stone bench near the altar, the faint glow of the feather on his shoulder casting a soft light in the shadows. It had become a constant companion, always with him, a reminder of the task ahead. But tonight, the feather felt heavier than ever before. Finn let out a deep sigh, running his fingers through his hair as he stared at the stone floor. The sound of his breath was the only thing that filled the silence of the temple. He had always been quiet, reserved, but this silence felt different. It felt suffocating. A cold shiver ran down his spine. And then, without warning, the voice came. "You are not enough." Finn froze. His breath hitched in his throat. The voice was not his own, but it felt so real. It wasn't the voice of the cloaked figure, nor anyone else he knew. It was cold, sharp, and filled with malice, and it seemed to come from the very air around him. The words echoed in the temple, bouncing off the stone walls like a shadow. "You will fail," the voice continued, its tone biting and cruel. "You do not have the strength, the wisdom. You are weak." End quote. Finn's heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out across his skin. He tried to shake the feeling, tried to push the voice away, but it didn't go. It dug into him, deep into his chest, like a splinter that refused to be removed. "No," Finn whispered to himself, his voice shaking. "No, I'm not weak." But the voice ignored him, its presence growing stronger, more oppressive. It felt like the weight of 1,000 failures pressing down on him at once. Like every doubt he had ever had was being dredged up and thrown in his face. He could feel his confidence slipping, his hands trembling, the thoughts clouding his mind. "You will never be good enough," the voice taunted. "You are just a boy. You're not meant to do this. You don't belong here." Finn's head dropped into his hands, his fingers digging into his scalp as if trying to hold himself together. He wanted to scream, to throw something, anything, to push the voice out of his mind, but the words stuck, gnawing at him, digging deeper into his thoughts. "Maybe it's right. Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe I'll fail them all. The souls, the temple, the whole purpose that has been thrust upon me." The feather on his shoulder began to pulse faintly in response, its glow shimmering like a soft beacon in the dark. It was as though the feather could sense the turmoil within him, reacting to the darkness that threatened to engulf him. Finn glanced at it, seeing it glow brighter than before, the light warm and comforting in the stillness of the temple. But even the feather, his constant companion, could not drown out the voice. It was everywhere now, echoing in the stone walls, swirling around him like an invisible storm. Finn closed his eyes tightly, willing the words to stop, to vanish. He clutched the feather, hoping its warmth would steady him. For a moment, everything was silent. The voice had faded, but so had the light. The warm glow of the feather seemed to dim, as if the weight of his own fears had taken away its power. Finn's hand trembled as he held it, unsure of what to do next. The doubts pressed in again, suffocating him, wrapping around his chest like a heavy cloak. He was a boy, no more than that. A boy who had never asked for any of this. How could he be the one chosen to guide souls to the afterlife? How could he, someone who had spent his life unsure of his place in the world, be worthy of such a monumental task? Maybe the voice was right. Maybe he was weak. But then, through the suffocating darkness of his thoughts, a small voice rose up within him. A whisper that was faint at first, but it grew louder with each passing moment, cutting through the shadows. "I can do this." The words were his own, but they did not feel like his own. They felt like a spark, a flicker of light in the darkness. They felt like something that had been there all along, waiting for him to recognize it. Finn's hand tightened around the feather, the warmth flooding through him once more. The glow from the feather brightened again, slowly at first, and then with greater intensity, as though it was affirming the words that had just echoed in his mind. "I have to do this." The voice in his mind, cold and sharp, began to fade, the weight of its cruel words lifting ever so slightly. Finn's breath steadied. His hands stopped shaking. He stood slowly, wiping away the sweat from his brow. The temple seemed to come alive with him. The air felt different, lighter, as though the walls themselves were rooting for him. "I am enough," Finn whispered aloud, this time with more conviction. "I may be a boy, but that doesn't mean I am weak. I was chosen for a reason. I will guide them. I will help them find peace." The words didn't come easily, but they felt true. For the first time since the feather had landed on his shoulder, Finn felt like he understood. He wasn't meant to be perfect. He wasn't meant to have all the answers. But he was enough. He was the one who could walk this path. He was the one who could offer the souls the peace they sought, even if he wasn't sure how to do it. The glow of the feather burned bright now, a steady, reassuring light that filled the temple with warmth. Finn closed his eyes, drawing in a steadying breath, letting the light wash over him. The doubts had not completely disappeared, but they were no longer in control. He had something stronger now, a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that would guide him, even when the path was unclear. As the last remnants of the darkness faded, Finn stood tall, his heart beating with a newfound determination. He would face whatever came next. He was ready. He had to be. And with that, the temple was still once more, the only sound, the steady rhythm of his own breath. The path ahead of Finn had always seemed uncertain, but now, with each soul he encountered, it became clearer. He was no longer just a boy, unsure of his place in the world. He was the guide of souls, a role he hadn't asked for, but one he was learning to accept. The days were long, filled with the souls of those who had passed, each one unique, each one carrying their own burdens, regrets, and longings. Finn had learned to listen to them, to offer them a brief moment of peace before they moved on to their next journey. But in his heart, there remained a quiet doubt. Was he truly capable of guiding them all? Was he enough to help every soul find their way? His next encounter would test him in ways he hadn't expected. It happened on a quiet evening, as the temple bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Finn had just finished his evening duties, preparing the temple for the night, when a figure appeared at the altar. It was a young girl, no older than 10, with bright, curious eyes that shimmered with a light of their own. Her face was delicate, framed by a tangle of dark hair, and though she was no longer of this world, there was something deeply alive about her spirit. She looked at Finn, and in that gaze, there was a mixture of sadness and hope, a longing for something. Perhaps peace, perhaps answers. Finn's heart tightened at the sight of her. He had seen many souls before, but none like this. There was something pure, almost fragile, in the way she looked at him, as though she had come to him with the weight of a great question, but was too young to fully understand it. She seemed both lost and expectant, as though waiting for him to offer her the guidance she needed. The girl stepped forward, her small form drifting toward him like a wisp of smoke. Her presence was faint, like the softest breeze, but it was undeniable. Finn's breath caught in his throat. He had learned to offer comfort, to listen, to be present, but this was different. This wasn't just a spirit needing to move on. This was a child. She was just a child. "Are you lost?" Finn asked softly, kneeling before her. The girl didn't answer with words. Instead, she smiled, a bittersweet expression that tugged at his heart. Finn felt a pang of something deep within him, empathy, perhaps. How could he, a boy who had never truly known the pains of life, offer anything to a child who had never been given the chance to grow? Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a quiet sadness. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know where to go. I don't know what happens next." Finn's heart ached as he gazed at her, her words filling the air with a sense of helplessness. How could he reassure her? He had never felt the fear she was speaking of, the fear of not knowing where you would go when your time on earth had ended. He had never been a child in her position. His life had been simple, and his path had always been clear. But now, standing before this young girl, he realized that he had no answers. He could offer no guarantees. All he could offer was his presence. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his hands as they shook. He had guided many souls, but this child, felt different. His purpose had never been clearer than it was in that moment. He wasn't here to fix her fear, to make her forget her sadness. He was here to help her move on, to guide her with the compassion and light that she needed to find peace. Finn extended his hand to her, just as he had done with the others. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't just a gesture. It wasn't just about guiding a soul from one world to the next. This was a promise. A promise to her, and to himself, that he would see her through, that he would help her cross over into the light. The girl hesitated for a moment, as if unsure. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, some sign that he could be trusted. Finn understood that look. He saw it in the eyes of every soul he had helped. They were all searching for someone to offer them a way forward, someone to assure them that they were not alone. In that moment, Finn understood the weight of his task. It wasn't just about guiding spirits. It was about offering them something deeper: hope, reassurance, the knowledge that they weren't forgotten. And so, he took her small, ethereal hand in his, feeling the warmth of her spirit flood into him. The moment their hands touched, a wave of peace washed over him, as if the world itself held its breath. He could feel the tension in the girl's spirit ease, her fear slipping away like the last remnants of a storm. Finn looked at her, offering a soft smile, and for the first time since he had taken on this role, he felt certain. "There is no need to be afraid," Finn said, his voice steady, though it trembled slightly with the weight of what he was about to say. "You are not alone. I will help you. The path ahead is bright, and you will find your way." And the girl looked at him with wide eyes, her expression shifting from sadness to something like understanding. It was as if she finally saw the light within him, the light that had always been there, waiting to be used. She smiled back at him, the sadness melting from her face, leaving only peace behind. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "I'm not scared anymore." End quote. In that moment, Finn felt something shift inside him, a feeling of accomplishment, yes, but also of deep understanding. He had done it. He had helped a soul move on, and in doing so, he realized that he wasn't just guiding spirits, he was also finding his own path. With every soul he helped, he was learning more about himself, about what it meant to have purpose, to be needed. The girl's form began to fade, dissolving into the light that had been waiting for her. Finn stood and watched as she became one with the light, her spirit finally at peace. The room, once heavy with her presence, now felt lighter, the air filled with a profound sense of serenity. As the last traces of the girl faded into the light, Finn stood still, his heart still beating with the rhythm of the moment. He had done it. He had truly become the guide of souls. The weight of that realization settled over him, both humbling and empowering. He was no longer just Finn, the boy from the village. He was something more. He had a purpose, a role to play in the grand scheme of the world, and with every soul he helped, he was becoming the person he was meant to be. For a moment, the temple was silent. The only sound, the soft rustling of the leaves outside. Finn stood alone, the glow of the feather on his shoulder soft but steady. It was no longer just a symbol of his calling, it was a reminder of the promise he had made, to the souls he would guide and to himself. As he stood there, he knew that his journey was just beginning. There would be many more souls to guide, many more moments of doubt, and many more chances to find his way. But for now, he had done what he was meant to do. And for the first time since the feather had landed on his shoulder, he felt at peace with that. Finn turned toward the door, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he would always be guided by the light within him. As the days passed, the rhythm of Finn's new life began to settle into a pattern. Each soul that arrived at the temple was another opportunity for him to fulfill his role. At first, the weight of guiding these spirits had been a heavy burden, one that pressed down on him with every passing day. He had questioned himself, his abilities, his worthiness for such an important task. The first days were full of uncertainty, and even after he had guided several souls, the doubts still clung to him like an unshakable shadow. But now, months had passed since the day the feather had landed on his shoulder, and something within Finn had changed. The fears that once clouded his mind had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that he hadn't known he was capable of. It was subtle at first, like the slow dawning of light on a foggy morning. He noticed it in the way he approached each soul, no longer hesitating or second-guessing himself. He saw it in the way the spirits seemed to trust him more now, as though they could sense the shift in his energy. They no longer looked to him with the same uncertainty he had once felt. They looked to him as if he were the one who could guide them, the one who could help them cross the threshold with peace. It was a confidence born not from arrogance, but from acceptance. Finn had stopped questioning himself. He no longer wondered if he was truly the right person for the job. He had come to realize that it wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about being present, being the steady light in the darkness for those who needed it. The doubts, once so loud and oppressive, had been replaced with a quiet assurance that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. The feather on his shoulder, which had once felt like a foreign object, something alien to him now, felt like a part of him. It was no longer a symbol of uncertainty. It had become a reminder, a connection to something greater, a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It was not just an object resting on his shoulder, it was a living part of his journey, a guide in its own right. Sometimes, when he was alone in the temple, Finn would touch the feather, letting its warmth fill him. It was as though it was speaking to him without words, reminding him that he was not alone, that he was never truly alone in his task. It had not been Finn who had chased destiny, it had simply found him. The feather had descended from the sky, silent and sure, and had landed gently upon his shoulder. And from that moment on, his life had been altered irrevocably. It had been as though destiny had chosen him, not because he was the most qualified or the bravest, but because he was the one who would listen, the one who would offer solace to those who needed it most. It wasn't about fighting for his place in the world, it was about accepting the path that had been laid before him. Finn had come to understand that he was not here to control fate, but to honor it. The feather was not a burden, nor a prize, it was a sign of his purpose, of his connection to the world beyond. He had stopped resisting it. Instead, he had learned to trust in its presence, to trust that he was where he needed to be. And with that trust, a new sense of peace settled over him, one that grew deeper with each passing soul he guided. The souls that arrived now came to him like old friends, their forms shimmering faintly in the light of the temple. Some of them were afraid at first, uncertain of what awaited them in the afterlife. Others were calm, resigned, or even eager to move on. But whatever their state, Finn had learned how to help them. He could feel the weight of their grief or the lightness of their relief as they crossed the threshold, and with each passing spirit, he felt himself growing more attuned to the delicate balance between the living and the dead. One evening, after guiding a particularly troubled spirit, Finn sat quietly on the stone bench near the altar, the temple bathed in soft moonlight. The air felt different tonight, charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. The feather on his shoulder seemed to pulse gently, its light flickering like a heartbeat. Finn reached up to touch it, letting his fingers trace the delicate strands. For a moment, he simply sat in the stillness, feeling the pulse of the feather beneath his touch, the hum of the world beyond. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, Finn closed his eyes and allowed himself to listen not just to the sounds of the temple or the distant rustle of the wind outside, but to the stillness within him. He could feel it, the peace that had begun to settle in his heart, the peace that had come from embracing his purpose. "I'm not afraid anymore," Finn whispered to himself. The words felt strange on his tongue, but they were true. For the first time since the feather had chosen him, he was not afraid of his task. He had once feared the enormity of it, the weight of guiding souls across the divide. But now, he understood that it was not about fear, it was about trust. Trust in himself, in the feather, in the path that had been set before him. As the moonlight streamed through the temple, casting its silver glow on the stone walls, Finn felt a sense of clarity. It was not the kind of clarity that came with certainty or answers, but the kind that came with acceptance. He didn't need to know everything. He didn't need to have all the answers. He only needed to be present, to offer his light to those who needed it, and to guide them with kindness and patience. The temple, once a place of mystery and uncertainty, now felt like home. It was a space where he had found his purpose, where he had come to understand the delicate dance between life and death. He had found his place here, among the spirits, among the souls he had helped cross over. He had found his light within, and it was a light that would guide him for the rest of his journey. In the distance, he could hear the faint rustle of wings, the soft whisper of the wind outside the temple. Finn stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, the weight of all the souls that had passed through him. He looked up at the stars, the sky above wide and infinite, and for the first time, he felt a deep connection to it all. The stars, the moon, the temple, the souls, everything seemed connected, as if the universe itself was gently guiding him, just as he was guiding the souls. He reached up and touched the feather once more, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was a smile of peace, of understanding. He had not sought destiny, nor had it sought him with force. It had simply found him, and in doing so, it had shown him a path, his path, and now he was ready to walk it, knowing that the light within him would guide both him and the souls he was meant to help. As the night deepened and the stars shone bright overhead, Finn felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He was no longer just the boy who had stumbled into this path by accident. He was the guide of souls, and he had finally come to accept it. The feather on his shoulder glowed softly in the dark, a steady reminder that he was never truly alone. He had found his place in the world, and in the quiet, he finally understood what it meant to be at peace with it. Finn returned to the village of Evershade on a quiet morning, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. The village, as it always had, rested peacefully in the valley, the distant mountain peaks shrouded in the early mist. The simple homes, nestled closely together like old friends, greeted him with an almost surreal familiarity. He had known these streets for as long as he could remember, but today they felt different. The path he walked was no longer just a road home, it was a threshold between two worlds. The boy who had once wandered these very streets, shy and unsure, seemed far away now. Finn barely recognized the hesitant figure he had once been, the quiet boy who had always lived in the shadows, the one who had stayed hidden in the background, afraid of standing out, of being noticed. No, that boy was gone. In his place was the guide of souls, a humble servant of destiny who had embraced his role with grace and newfound strength. As Finn walked, his gaze naturally shifted to the feather resting against his shoulder, its faint glow still present despite the daylight. Once a symbol of uncertainty and self-doubt, it had become something much more. Now, it was a reminder of the journey he had taken, of the lessons he had learned, and of the lives he had touched. Every soul he had guided, every spirit he had helped find peace, had left an indelible mark on him, and with each mark, he had grown, not only as a guide, but as a person. The feather, a part of him now, was a constant companion, a reminder of how far he had come, and how far he had yet to go. The people of Evershade were still the same, friendly, simple, and kind, but as Finn made his way through the village, he felt a distance between them and himself, as though he were seeing them from a different vantage point. They didn't know what he had become. They couldn't possibly understand the weight of what he had experienced, the lives he had touched, the souls he had guided. And perhaps they didn't need to. Perhaps this was his journey alone, a quiet path he would walk in solitude, but with the knowledge that he had fulfilled his purpose. His father's blacksmith shop came into view, the sound of hammers striking metal ringing through the air. Finn paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the familiar scene. He had spent many years here, learning the trade from his father, a man who had never said much but whose love was always evident in his actions. Finn had always admired his father's quiet strength, his steady hand and unwavering commitment to his craft. But Finn knew now that the strength his father had always shown was not the kind that had shaped his destiny. His own path had been different, one that had led him beyond the physical world into something much deeper, a world of souls and eternal light. As he stepped closer to the shop, the door creaked open, and his father appeared in the doorway. The sight of the older man, his face lined with age and the years of hard work, brought a sense of warmth to Finn's heart. His father's eyes, once hard and focused, softened as he took in the sight of his son. "Finn," his father said, his voice deep and steady, just as it always had been. There was no question in his tone, no surprise, only recognition. "You've come home." Finn nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He had thought about this moment often in the time he had been away, wondering what it would feel like to return, to stand before the man who had raised him. He had imagined 100 different scenarios, but none of them had been like this. The weight of his journey, the people he had helped, the souls he had guided, they all seemed to rush back to him in that moment. He had learned so much, and yet, standing before his father, he realized there was still much more to learn. "I'm not the same boy who left," Finn said quietly. His father didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Finn with a kind of quiet understanding, his eyes searching his son's face, perhaps seeing something in him that was both familiar and new. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his father nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I can see that," he said, his voice softening. "But you're still my son, and that's all that matters." The simplicity of his father's words hit Finn like a wave, for all the distance he had felt from the villagers, from his father. In that moment, he realized that the most important thing was not the role he had been given, nor the souls he had guided. It was the relationships that remained, the love that persisted, even through change. His father's words were not just a comfort, they were a reminder of the grounding truth that no matter what destiny had shaped him into, he was still the boy from Evershade, still the son of the man who had taught him what it meant to be strong. As the afternoon sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, Finn found himself once again at peace. He had come home, not as a boy who had once been lost in the shadows, but as a man who had found his place in the world. He had embraced his role as the guide of souls, not because it was easy, but because it was right. He had walked the path laid before him, guided by the light within, and now he was ready for whatever came next. Finn's father placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, as if no further words were needed. Finn felt the weight of those words settle deep within him. He had sought approval all his life, but in that moment, he realized that his father's approval, though deeply cherished, was not what had driven him. He had guided souls not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was his purpose, and in doing so, he had become the person he was always meant to be. The journey he had taken, with all its trials and triumphs, had shaped him into something far more than just a boy from a quiet village. The feather on his shoulder, glowing softly in the fading light, was the only reminder Finn needed of the path he had walked. It had never been about choosing a role, it had always been about embracing the role that had chosen him. The feather had come to him not as a burden, but as a guide. And now, as Finn stood before his father, he understood that the feather was not the only thing that had guided him. The love, the lessons, and the wisdom of the village had shaped him just as much. As he stood there, with the village and the people he had known for so long surrounding him, Finn realized that he was no longer the boy who had hidden in the background, unsure of his place. He was the guide of souls, and his journey was not just a path between the living and the dead, it was a journey that had led him to the heart of life itself. And as he turned toward the horizon, toward the future, he knew that his journey was far from over. Destiny had not just chosen him, it had shaped him. And in shaping him, it had shown him that the path ahead was not one to walk alone. With the feather at his side and the light within him, Finn stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. Finn had guided countless souls since the moment the feather had first settled upon his shoulder. Each one a unique journey, each one a new lesson. He had learned to listen, to offer comfort, and to help those who had passed find the peace they were searching for. Some had been lost, others had been ready to move on. Some had clung to their regrets, others had embraced the transition with grace. Through it all, Finn had remained a steady presence, guiding them with patience and compassion. But deep within him, there lingered a sense of incompleteness. He had never doubted his calling. He knew this was what he was meant to do. But there was something about the task that left a small part of him uncertain. Was he truly ready? Was he truly capable of doing this for every soul, especially the ones whose burdens were heavier than others? It wasn't until the arrival of the last soul that Finn truly understood the full depth of his role. This soul was different from all the others. The moment it appeared, Finn knew that it would be his final test. The soul that stood before him was not like the young ones or the older, peaceful spirits he had guided before. This one was marked by time, by life lived with a weight that seemed to press down upon it. The figure was a man, older, his face weathered by the years, his body frail. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now dimmed, clouded by sorrow, regret, and a deep sense of something unfinished. Finn could feel the gravity of this soul's presence. He wasn't sure why, but something about it stirred a recognition in him. A feeling that he had known this man before, or at least had known someone like him. It was as if the man's soul had a story, a history, that resonated with something deep within Finn. He stepped forward, his heart heavy with a sense of finality. This was it. This was the soul he had been waiting for. The man didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, his shoulders slumped, his eyes searching the ground. He was lost, adrift, like so many of the souls Finn had encountered before him. But this man's pain felt different. It was rawer, deeper. It felt as though he had carried this sorrow for lifetimes, and now, at the end of his journey, it had finally caught up to him. Finally, the man spoke, his voice trembling like the wind before a storm. "I have lived a life full of regrets," he said, his words thick with sorrow. "I have caused harm, hurt those I loved, and I don't know if I deserve peace." Finn's heart tightened as he listened to the man's words. He could feel the weight of them, the deep, aching regret that echoed in the man's voice. It wasn't just sorrow for mistakes made. It was a self-imposed burden, a belief that the man was beyond redemption, beyond peace. Finn had heard this before, the belief that the soul was irredeemable, that the mistakes of the past could never be forgiven, no matter how hard they tried. But he had also seen something in those souls, the flicker of hope, the glimmer of light that could still break through the darkness. Finn knelt beside the man, his gaze gentle but unwavering. The feather on his shoulder, always a reminder of his task, seemed to pulse softly, as if in response to the man's pain. Finn reached out slowly, placing a hand on the man's arm, offering him a quiet presence, a bridge between the past and the future. "You have the choice," Finn said softly, his voice steady but full of compassion. "You can find peace, but it's up to you." The words felt heavy as they left his mouth, but they were true. Every soul had a choice to make. Every soul had the power to decide what their final step would be. Finn had learned this truth over time, guiding each soul with the understanding that peace wasn't something he could give them, it was something they had to choose for themselves. His role was only to help them see it, to help them find the path to it. The man paused for a long moment, his eyes distant, as though he were searching for something in the depths of his soul. He looked at the feather on Finn's shoulder, his expression unreadable. Finn didn't rush him. He simply waited, letting the silence fill the space between them. This was a moment that belonged to the man, a moment where he had to choose whether to let go of his burdens, whether to release the weight of the regrets that had held him in place for so long. Finally, the man's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion. But it was enough. It was a choice, a decision to step forward, to release the past, and find the peace he had denied himself for so long. At that moment, Finn knew that his work was done. The man's form began to shift, to fade, as the light from the world beyond began to surround him. Finn stood, watching, his heart filled with a mixture of sadness and peace. The man's spirit was ready to move on. The weight of his regrets, his pain, his sorrow, all began to lift, replaced by the light of understanding, the light of acceptance. His journey had come to an end, not because he had found perfection, but because he had found forgiveness, both for himself and from the universe. As the man's spirit faded into the light, Finn felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. It was as though the very air had shifted, as though the weight of the man's suffering had been lifted, and in its place there was nothing but calm. The temple, the place that had once felt heavy with the presence of so many souls, now felt filled with light. The walls, the stone, the very earth beneath his feet seemed to hum with a soft, quiet energy. Finn stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The journey had not been easy, far from it. He had faced doubts, fears, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. But in this final moment, with the last soul he would ever guide, Finn realized something profound. He had not just guided the man to peace. In a way, he had guided himself. The feather on his shoulder, once a symbol of uncertainty, now felt like a symbol of his own journey. It had been there through every doubt, every fear, and every soul he had helped. It had watched as he grew, as he transformed from a boy unsure of his place in the world to someone who had truly found his purpose. It had been his guide, just as much as it had been the guide for the souls he had helped. As the last traces of the man's spirit disappeared into the light, Finn felt a deep, profound sense of peace settle over him. It was as if everything had come full circle. He had guided the souls, but in doing so, he had found his place in the world, not in the shadows, as he once had been, but in the light. It wasn't just about helping others find peace, it was about finding peace within himself. The temple, now quiet, was filled with the lingering presence of the souls that had passed through, the souls he had helped guide. Each one had left a mark on him, just as he had left a mark on them. He had done what he was meant to do, and in doing so, he had learned more about himself than he could have ever imagined. As Finn stood there, the quiet night stretching before him, he knew that his work had come to an end. The last soul had passed on, and with it, his role as the guide of souls had been fulfilled. But Finn was not the same boy who had first arrived at the temple. He was not the same boy who had once wondered if he was worthy. He was a man, strong in his purpose, at peace with himself. And as the feather rested against his shoulder, Finn understood that his journey was not over. It was simply the beginning of a new path, one that would take him forward, into the light, where he would continue to walk, not alone, but with the souls he had helped, always at his side. Finn's story spread throughout the land, becoming a legend that was told for generations. His legacy lived on, not as a tale of greatness or power, but as a story of humility, of a boy who had embraced his destiny and found his place in the world. And every time a feather fell from the sky, someone would remember the boy who had chosen to guide souls. Years passed since Finn had embraced his role as the guide of souls. The village of Evershade had flourished, its inhabitants living in harmony. The memory of the humble boy who once lived among them now whispered only in legend. The feather, once the symbol of uncertainty, had become a revered token. It was no longer just an object. It was a living testament to the quiet power of destiny. Finn, however, had not forgotten the lessons he had learned along the way. He spent his days in solitude, guiding the souls of the departed and helping them find their way to peace. But even with his inner peace, there was a part of him that had always wondered, what happened after? What was the ultimate purpose of guiding souls? It was in the midst of one such contemplation that a new soul appeared before him. This soul was not like any he had encountered before. It was an ethereal figure, not bound by time, not bound by age. It was as though the soul had existed for eternity, waiting for its moment. "I have come for guidance," the soul spoke, its voice like an ancient melody, timeless and haunting. Finn stood still, his heart racing. "Who are you?" he asked, feeling both the familiarity and strangeness of the presence. The soul's eyes, deep and endless, looked upon Finn with a knowing gaze. "I am the echo of all the souls you have ever guided. I am the memory of those whose paths you helped shape. You see, Finn, every action ripples through time, and every soul you guide leaves an imprint that transcends their journey. I am the reflection of that ripple." Finn's mind spun with confusion. "But I do not remember them all. I do not remember every soul I've guided." The The soul smiled gently. No, you do not need to. But they remember you. The peace you have given them lives on, and now you must guide the one final soul, the soul of the past, present, and future. Finn's breath caught. What do you mean? What do I have to do? You have already done it, the soul said, its form beginning to dissipate, leaving behind a faint glow that resonated with Finn's heart. Now, understand this. It is time for you to become a part of eternity, not just as the guide, but as a part of the cycle. The feather chose you because it knew you were the one who could carry the light forward. And now, the time has come for you to pass it on. The days following the encounter with the soul were filled with a sense of urgency, yet a profound peace. Finn knew what he had to do, but he did not know how. It had been so long since that first day when the feather had chosen him, when it had softly landed on his shoulder and altered the course of his life. Now, it was time for that very same feather to be passed on. He spent hours, days even, reflecting on the souls he had guided. He visited the ancient temple once more, standing before the stone altar where it all began. The temple, once a place of mystery, now felt like a home, a place of solace, a place of understanding. The feather, glowing softly, lay beside him. Finn held it in his hand, feeling its weight. It had grown lighter over the years, a testament to the many souls it had helped find peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Finn knew what was required. He called forth the energy that had always been within him, the power that had guided him all these years. He raised the feather high, and as the first star appeared in the sky, a figure materialized before him. It was the cloaked figure from all those years ago, the one who had shown him his destiny. You have learned much, the figure said, their voice soft yet powerful. You have carried the weight of souls, and now you are ready. Finn extended the feather toward the figure. I am ready to pass it on, to the one who is meant to guide now. The cloaked figure reached out and took the feather, their face illuminated by its glow. It is not a burden, Finn. It is a gift. You have carried it well, and now it is time for another to carry it forward. Finn felt a deep sense of peace as the feather was transferred. He had done his part. He had guided souls and helped them find their peace. And now, his journey was complete. The night air was cool, and the moon shone brightly overhead. Finn stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the cloaked figure disappeared into the distance. The passing of the feather was not an end, but a continuation of a cycle that would go on forever, as long as there were souls to guide. But Finn knew his time had come. He had found his place in the world, not just as a boy who had been chosen by fate, but as a man who had fulfilled his purpose. The weight that had once been upon his shoulders was now lifted, and he felt lighter than he ever had before. He had no regrets, no lingering doubts. He had given everything he could, and now he could rest. As the figure of the new guide emerged from the shadows, Finn turned away, knowing that the journey would continue, and that the light would always find its way, no matter how dark the path seemed. The feather had chosen him once, and now it would choose another. And with that, Finn's journey came to an end. It was not long after that Finn found himself walking through the meadows of Evershade, the village where his story had begun. The village had grown, and new faces had appeared. But there was a sense of timelessness in the air. Everything had returned to its natural rhythm, and Finn knew that his journey was now a part of the land woven into the fabric of the village, the lives of those who lived there, and the souls that had passed through him. He walked past the old blacksmith's forge, now silent, and remembered the boy who had once been too shy to speak up. He had been afraid of his own worth, afraid of the responsibility that had landed so softly on his shoulder. But now, he understood. He had always been worthy. He had always been enough. As Finn stood by the river, the final vestiges of twilight fading into the night, he felt a calmness wash over him. The sky above, filled with stars, reminded him of the journey he had taken, of the souls he had helped, and the life he had lived. Finn had once been just a boy, unsure of his place in the world. But now, he was a part of something much larger, a part of the endless flow of time, of light, of souls. And as the river continued its quiet, eternal course, so too did Finn's legacy. The feather had chosen him, and now he had chosen peace. Thank you for joining Finn on his journey. If his story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more tales of destiny, self-worth, and the quiet power that resides within us all. Until next time, remember, sometimes, the smallest things can change the course of our lives forever.